Alright, we're going to learn how to draw water here, and I have here before me a drawing that I have already sketched the outline of a landscape here, and I have left everything, I've drawn everything, and I have just left the area for the water. Now the reason why I have done this is when you are drawing water, all water is basically just creating shades with the pencil. You're creating darker shades in some areas around the edges of the water and where the bank is, and you're also creating some light shade where you're going to have some of your reflections. But the reason that you want to have a landscape drawn out like this, and that's why I've done it here for this lesson, is once you create shades you can create the water, but if you don't have a landscape around it to represent that it is water, most of the time it's really not going to look a whole lot like water. Now it may, if you just take a blank piece of paper and you just do some shading and you have a little bit of a reflection there, it might represent a little bit that is water, but just the shading alone, you're not really going to be able to tell if it's water until you put it together with a element of a landscape such as the bank here and trees around it here. But let's get started and show you how to create water. And what I'm going to do is just create a little bit of a, it's got a little bit of a stream coming down through here where the trees are, and then it just kind of widens up as you get out here. You still always want to just start out with a light shade. You just, regardless of how big or how small that you're creating your water, you just want to start out with a fairly light shade. Now I'm actually using a 4B pencil here for the purpose of this video so that you can really see exactly what is going on here. So what I'm doing here is I'm just creating just a shade just to cover where my water is going to be. Just like the shading lessons that you have already went through and already learned, this is really no different when you're creating and drawing out your water. Now I've got these rocks here that I've already drawn where the water is going to be, so I'm just going to just lightly shade around in between where these rocks are. And you can do a whole lot of things whenever you're creating the water. You can use the eraser like we've used it many a times, and you can take the eraser and you can actually draw some highlights in the water wherever you're wanting the water to actually be a lot lighter or showing a reflection of light of some sort. But remember, you always want to start out light no matter what you're shading. It's always best to start out fairly light when you are shading. You can always get darker, but most of the time it's hard if you start out too dark right off the bat. It gets kind of hard to lighten it up a little bit. You can lighten it up using the eraser, but it's usually just a little bit harder to do that. Now I'll try not to go too much out of the view of my camera here with the areas that I'm shading, just so you can see what I'm doing. And as you can see here, it's just a typical shade as you would normally shade. Then what you would want to do is you would want to come in and take a blending stump. Instead of really going in too much of a circular motion with this blending stump, you would just want to go the angle of your water, the way that your water is actually flowing. Like in this case, it's actually flowing side to side. So this is basically how you want to blend in your water elements here. As you see, we're just moving it in from side to side, being careful not to touch on the tree a whole lot. But you do want to get a real good blend, and you can actually skip a few areas like I'm doing here. This is going to help make a good representation of your water. As you skip a few areas, then you're going to see that there's some white space type areas there in the where the water is, and this is actually going to give you a real good representation of the water. And typically around the banks, like I mentioned a moment ago, most of the time your water is just a little bit darker around the edges where they come up against these rocks here and around the bank. But once you start shading, you really want to always go and move in the same direction that you start in, so that you can actually give it an even tone of shade, or an even form. You don't want to kind of go vertical one way at one time, and then you don't want to go and do horizontal the next time. And you'll find yourself having to go over your water more than once, just depending on how dark you want to get some areas and how light that you want to get some areas as well. And just leaving it, you know, where we're at right now is not too bad at all. But once you get some of your shading done, your first layer of shading, basically what you would want to do is, if you want to create a reflection, like say we're going to do a reflection of this tree right here, we're going to try to maybe take this limb right here, and basically what you would want to do is just kind of, you would want to try to draw a little bit light and just kind of mirror that just a little bit. Let me take my pencil here. I went out of line with that just a little bit from where I wanted to be. We're just going to give it a little light shade here. Typically you would want to do this with another pencil, but I'm using the same pencil for this whole little project here. Actually using the 4B of just the same thing that I've actually used to shade with. So now I'm just going to blend that reflection just a little bit. Then I'm going to make some texture here, just to show a little bit of texture. Just to give it a good representation of the foliage that's around it. And it's always good, you can always take like your big eraser, and you can always just go around and you can just lighten it up just a little bit. You don't want to really rub on it too hard, but you just want to do it enough that's going to lighten up the reflection here just a little bit. And then you can go back in and you can just add some darker values to where the edges of your bank is. And then you can shade just a little bit darker in some areas. But you want to keep some areas fairly light. And then once you do that, you just go back with your blending stump and just want to darken those in. You want to smooth them out a little bit around the edges that you've darkened in. Like I said, you don't have to completely cover every inch of your paper. As a matter of fact, you really don't want to do that. This way you'll get a good representation that there are some water here. And a little representation of your reflection that is in your water. And then what I'm going to do here is take this smaller eraser and I'm just going to highlight around these rocks here. Just to give it a good representation of light that is actually around the rocks. And if you want to show a little bit of a reflection down here, best way to make a reflection is take the wide eraser, take the very edge of the eraser, and you can just do some little lines, just some little jagged lines, you know, like so. And that will give you a good representation of some reflection that is in your water. And just say, like, if you're wanting to do some representation of this tree, and you can just do some good highlights right there. It's good for highlighting, making reflections, you know, of grass and all that type stuff too as well. This is a good way to give you some good representation of reflections that is in the water. You can actually go here and we can do some here for the grass that is on the land here. You don't want to go too crazy with it, but you just want to be able to convey the message that there are some reflections there. And then you can just take your eraser and just kind of go diagonal this way from your drawing, and then you can just kind of lighten it up in some areas. And that's a good way to give you some good representation of water and some good representation that there are some reflections in the water. You know, there's a lot of different directions, a lot of different ways that you can go with this. You can just darken, you can lighten up exactly the areas that you want to darken, that you want to lighten up. It's always good if you can just lighten up your water a whole lot. You don't want to have everything, you know, just too dark. And all I'm doing here is just taking and making lines in the same direction I was going as that when I was shading, to just create some added value here for the water. So this is a simple way to make water. Just all you have to do is just do your basic shading, and then you go back in and you basically add some light reflections of the trees that surround and some of the grass that surround the water or on the banks. And you could actually put a lot of work in here. You can actually take charcoal and put it on a cotton ball, and you can actually just smooth it on there real good, and it'll be a whole lot smoother. and you can create some good highlights in the water that way. But this is basically how you want to create your water, and how you draw your water, and how you draw your reflections of items that is in the water, and take the eraser and just kind of make little line marks with the edge of your eraser, and it shows a good representation of some reflections coming off of the trees. And this tree right here is not really this tree reflecting. If I wanted this tree reflecting, I would actually just draw it like I did this little limb here. With this little light shading that I did, or this highlighting that I did with the eraser here, is just throwing some light off the tree and back onto the water. And the same way with the eraser that I did, just going sideways here, lightening up around the rocks and some dark values here. It just gives you a good sense that this is water here, and this is a good way to create water. And like I said, you can always take and put a charcoal on a cotton ball, and you can actually rub it straight across and really get some real smooth textures to represent some water as well. So one thing to remember with water, if you create just these shadings just on plain paper, it's not going to look a whole lot like water. But once you create the surrounding area of your landscape, like your trees and your grass and your rocks, and you show these reflections, then it's going to convey the message that it is a lot of water here. Well, that's it for this module. Stay tuned for the next module, which will teach you how to draw rocks, and that will be all of the modules for now. Alright, I want to show you how to refine a drawing here with the water just a little bit. You see that I'm taking my blending stump and I'm going back over the drawing that I created earlier when I drew in the water. One thing that you want to do to refine it is you just really want to blend it really good, and that's what I would like to do to make it look a lot better. And I start by going in and refining the edges here. You always want to go in and make the edges next to the bank where the water is. You want to make it dark, and you just want to go through the edges throughout the bank there, and because typically your water is a little bit dark whenever it is going up against the bank and the edges of the bank there, and it really makes it look a whole lot better. I'm going to just go in here and just darken around the rock just a little bit. The smoother you can get the water, the graphite right there that represents the water, it makes it look better. It makes it look more realistic, and it also makes it shine a lot better. The reflections that you make and create, and some of the white space that you create, it actually makes it shine just a little bit better. So by taking the blending stump, you don't have to use any more graphite. If you've already got a good bit of graphite down, you don't have to reapply any graphite. You just want to take your blending stump like I'm doing here and just shade and make it darker around the edges of the bank. And you want to make some of the water in the middle areas, you want to make those a little bit dark as well. But you also want to leave a lot of lightness as well. So this is basically a good way to go in and refine the water. I could have left it as it was when I first drawn in the water, but I did want to show you how to refine the water and shade it in and make it look a lot better. And stay tuned for the next module. We'll learn how to draw rocks.